The Story of Civilization, Part 2. The Life of Greece, being a history of Greek civilization from the beginnings and of civilization in the Near East, from the death of Alexander to the Roman conquest, with an introduction on the prehistoric culture of Crete by Will Durant. Chapter 4, Sparta. Part 6, Megara. Megara loved gold as much as Corinth did, and like her, thrived on commerce. It had, however, a great poet, in whose verses the ancient city lives as if its revolutions were one with our own. Well, that's what art tends to do, right? It tends to be relevant to more than its specific situation. Standing at the very entrance to the Peloponnesus, with a port on either gulf, it was in a position to bargain with armies and levy tolls upon trade, to which it added a busy textile industry, manned with men and women who, in the honest phraseology of the day, were called slaves. The city flourished best in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, when it disputed the commerce of the Isthmus with the Corinth. It was then that it sent out as trading posts colonies as far flung as Byzantium on the Bosphorus and Megara, Habla'a, and Sicila. Wealth mounted, but the clever gathered it so narrowly into their hands that the mass of the people, destitute serfs, amid plenty, listened readily to men who promised them a better life. About 630 BCE, Theagenes, having decided to become dictator, praised the poor and denounced the rich, led a starving mob into the pastures of the wealthy breeders, had himself voted a bodyguard, increased it, and with it overthrew the government. For a generation, Theagenes ruled Megara, freed the serfs, humbled the mighty, and patronized the arts. Towards 600 BCE, the rich deposed him in return. But a third revolution restored the democracy, which confiscated the property of leading aristocrats, commandeered rich homes, abolished debts, and passed a decree regarding the wealthy to refund the interest that had been paid them by their debtors. Theognis lived through these revolutions and described them in bitter poems that might be the voice of our class for today. He was, he tells us, for he is our sole authority on this subject, a member of an ancient and noble family. He must have grown up in comfortable circumstances, for he was guide, philosopher, and lover to a youth named Kurnas, who became one of the leaders of the aristocratic party. He gives Kurnas much advice and asks merely love in return. Like all lovers, he complains of short measure, and his finest extant poem reminds Kurnas that he will achieve immortality only through Theognis' poetry. Lo, I have given thee wings wherewith to fly over the boundless ocean and the earth. Yea, on the lips of many shalt thou lie, the comrade of their banquet and their mirth. Youths in their loveliness shall bid thee sound upon the silver flute's melodious breath, and when thou goest, darkling underground, down to the lamentable house of death, O yet not then from honor shalt thou cease, but wander an imperishable name. Kurnas about the seas and shores of Greece, crossing from isle to isle the barren main. Horses thou shalt not need, but lightly ride, sped by the muses of the violet crown. and men to come, while earth and sun abide. Who cherish song shall cherish thy renown. Yea, I have given thee wings, and in return thou givest me the scorn with which I burn. He warns Cernus that the injustices of the aristocracy may provoke a revolution. And this following poem, the inscription of the poem and of those quoted below to a certain period in Theognis' life is hypothetical. So at least when this book was written, they really didn't know. Our state is pregnant, shortly to produce a rude avenger of prolonged abuse. The commons, hitherto, seem sober-minded, but the superiors are corrupt and blinded. The rule of noble spirits, brave and high, never endangered peace and harmony. The supercilious, arrogant pretense of feeble minds, weakness and insolence, justice and truth and law wrested aside, like crafty shifts of avarice and pride. These are our ruin. Cernus, never dream, tranquil and undisturbed as it may seem, of future peace or safety to the state. Bloodshed and strife will follow, soon or late. Now, it is said that in poetry there can be an evil magic. The revolution came. Theognis was among the men exiled by the triumphant democracy, and his property was confiscated. He left his wife and children with friends, and wandered from state to state, Euboea, Thebes, Sparta, Sicula, at first welcomed and fed for his poetry. Then, lapsing into a bitter and unaccustomed poverty, out of his resentment, he addresses to Zeus the questions which Job would ask of Yahweh. Well, limited or unlimited, they tend to be put into pretty much the same positions of theology. Monotheist or polytheist, as terms of a name. Yahweh as a formula, not just a name of a deity. Well, a lot of these names of deity are formulas more than, oh, well, his first name is this sort of way of thinking. Blessed Almighty Jove, with deep amaze, I view the world and marvel at thy ways. How can you reconcile it to your sense of right and wrong thus loosely to dispense? Your bounties on the wicked and the good. How can your laws be known or understood? He becomes bitter against the leaders of the democracy. Republic's probably the better word for that, and prays to this inscrutable Zeus for the boon of drinking their blood. In the first known use of this metaphor, he likens the state of Megara to a ship whose pilot has been replaced by disorderly and unskilled mariners. He argues that some men are by nature abler than others, and that, therefore, aristocracy in some form is inevitable. Already men have discovered that majorities never rule. He uses hoi, agathoi, the good, as synonymous with the aristocrats, and hoi, kakoi, the bad, base, worthless, as signifying the common people. And you can't look at wealth and decide that, but, people can, but you know what I mean. These native differences, he thinks, are ineradicable. No amount of teaching will make a bad man good. Well, if he's still alive, perhaps. Though he may merely mean here that no training can turn a commoner into an aristocrat. Like all good conservatives, He is strong for eugenics. The evils of the world are due not to the greed of the good, but to their misalliances and their infertility. He plots with Kurnas another counter-revolution. He argues that even if one has taken a vow of loyalty to the new government, it is permissible to assassinate a tyrant, and he pledges himself to work with his friends until they have taken full vengeance upon their foes. Nevertheless, after many years of exile and loneliness, he bribes an official to let him return to Megara. He is revolted at his own duplicity and writes lines of despair that hundreds of Greeks would quote, "Not to be born, never to see the sun. No worldly blessing is a greater one. And the next best is speedily to die, and lapped beneath a load of earth to lie." Now, without seeing the Greek, or having some of the in-ways and byways of what makes it a good Greek poem, you can't necessarily tell by, translations and all that sort of stuff. In the end, we find him back in Megara, old and broken, and promising, for safety's sake, never again to write of politics. He consoles himself with wine and a loyal wife, and does his best to learn at last the lesson that everything natural is forgivable. Learn, Kurnas. Learn to bear an easy mind. Accommodate your humor to mankind, and human nature take it as you find, a mixture of ingredients good and bad. Such are we all, the best that can be had. The best are found defective, and the rest, for common use, are equal to the best. Suppose it had been otherwise decreed, how could the business of the world proceed? And we should be careful how we are paired. To what ends? And the company that we keep.